I still remember the exact moment it happened. It was a calm Tuesday morning. The kind of morning where everything feels normal, coffee brewing, sunlight filtering through the blinds, and the faint sound of lawnmowers echoing down the street. Then I opened my mailbox. Inside was a thick envelope stamped with the familiar, dreaded logo of the Homeowners Association, the HOA. At first, I thought it was another newsletter or maybe one of their petty violation notices. But when I tore it open, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Final notice, outstanding balance, $70,423.18. I froze, my hands went cold. I had lived in this neighborhood for 8 years. I paid every fee on time, never once missed a payment. So how in the world could I owe $70,000? I stared at the paper, flipping through the pages. They had a detailed breakdown: landscaping fines, structural violations, maintenance fees, even legal processing charges. None of it made sense. My property hadn't changed in years, and half of those supposed violations didn't even exist. At the bottom of the last page was something even stranger. A signature. My name written in a smooth, elegant script that definitely wasn't mine. I didn't even need to think twice. That wasn't my handwriting. Still, the letter stated clearly, per signed acknowledgement on April 17, homeowner accepted revised fee agreement. April 17th. That was the day I'd been out of town on a business trip. I could feel my heartbeat climbing, a dull roar rising in my ears. Someone had forged my signature. That night, I spread every HOA letter I'd ever received across my dining table. I went through years of correspondence, payment receipts, and violation forms. I even pulled out old emails and bank statements. Everything matched perfectly until 6 months ago. That's when the tone of their letters changed. Suddenly, they started charging for tree trimming noncompliance, community parking enforcement, and landscape restoration, none of which I had ever requested or approved. Then I noticed the name at the bottom of every new letter: property manager Susan Blake. I'd never heard of her. Our community manager had always been Mr. Donnelly, a quiet man in his 60s who'd managed the neighborhood for over a decade. So who was Susan Blake? I checked the HOA's website, and there she was, a smiling woman in her 40s with a clipboard standing in front of a perfectly manicured lawn. Her bio said she'd been serving this community since 2022. But that wasn't true. I knew every manager since I moved here. There had never been a Susan Blake. Something was very wrong. The next morning, I drove straight to the HOA office, a small beige building at the edge of our neighborhood with a perfect American flag fluttering outside. Inside, the air smelled of fresh coffee and disinfectant. A young receptionist looked up and smiled. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you?" "I need to speak with Susan Blake," I said. Her smile flickered. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, tell her it's about the $70,000 fee." Her eyes widened just a bit and she picked up the phone. After a brief whisper, she told me Susan was in a meeting but could see me shortly. I waited 15 minutes before a woman in a red blazer walked out, confident, polished, the same face from the website. "Mr. Harris," she said, extending her hand. "Susan Blake, please come in." Her office was spotless: glass table, small plants, motivational quotes on the wall. She gestured for me to sit. "I understand you received a notice regarding your outstanding balance," she said smoothly. "I know it's a large amount, but unfortunately it has accumulated over multiple years of unresolved fees." I stared at her. "That's impossible. I've paid every single one on time and someone forged my signature." Her smile didn't fade. "We have the documents on file. Would you like to see them?" "Yes," I said firmly. She pulled a folder from her cabinet and slid it across the table. Inside were copies of multiple payment deferral agreements, all signed with my name, each document dated between April and August. Every signature was fake. "I didn't sign these," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "This is fraud." Susan leaned back, crossing her arms. "I understand this must be frustrating, but these are legally binding agreements. If you wish to dispute, you'll have to contact our legal counsel." She handed me a card: Riley and Cole, attorneys at law. Then she smiled again, too calmly. "I suggest you act quickly. Interest continues to accumulate." When I got home, I sat in my car for a long time. My hands gripped the steering wheel, shaking. Something about her demeanor, that calm, rehearsed tone, told me she knew exactly what she was doing. I went inside and searched for the law firm online. They existed, a small firm downtown that specialized in property disputes. I decided to visit them the next day. But that night I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the forged signature under the lamp's yellow light. The more I looked, the more details stood out, the slight slant of the letters, the way the R in my last name curled differently. Whoever had done it knew my handwriting well enough to make it believable. Then another thought hit me. When had the HOA gotten hold of my signature at all? I checked my past correspondence. Years ago, when I bought the house, I had signed a few community forms, welcome papers, code acknowledgments, and the standard fee consent. They must have scanned and stored those. Someone inside had access to my old records. And someone used them. The next day, I drove downtown to the law firm. It was a small brick building squeezed between a coffee shop and a dentist's office. The receptionist led me to a young attorney named Brian Cole. He looked through the documents I'd brought, his brows furrowed deeper with every page. "Mr. Harris," he said finally, "these are serious accusations. If your signature was forged, that's criminal fraud." But, he flipped through the final pages, "These copies are digitally stamped by the HOA's internal verification system. That makes it hard to dispute unless we get the originals." "Can we request them?" I asked. "We can, but they're not legally obligated to provide them without a court order." I felt my stomach twist. So what am I supposed to do? They're threatening to put a lien on my house. Brian leaned back thinking, "There's another way. File a dispute with the county records office. If any document involving your property was falsified, the county must investigate." That sounded like hope, slim but real. 2 days later, I submitted a formal dispute. They said the process could take weeks. In the meantime, the HOA continued sending me warnings, more letters, more threats. One afternoon, while checking my mailbox, I saw my neighbor, Mrs. Clark. Watering her garden, she waved and said, "Did you get one of those new bills too?" I walked over. "You mean the HOA ones?" She nodded. "Yeah, mine says I owe $12,000 for landscaping upgrades I never approved. I tried calling them, but that new manager, Susan, she said it's already processed." I felt a chill. "Wait, you've never signed anything?" "No," she said, "but they had a signature on file." I told her that wasn't mine. She didn't care. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just me. I spent that evening knocking on doors, 5 neighbors, then 6. 4 of them said they'd been charged for strange fees in the past few months. 2 even mentioned seeing new documents with their signatures. It was the same pattern. Forged agreements, fake approvals, legal threats. Someone inside the HOA was manufacturing debt. And I had a feeling who it was. By Friday, the tension had eaten through every part of me. I could barely focus on work. I started gathering every bit of evidence I could find: letters, payment confirmations, even photographs of my house showing no violations. Then, while digging through my old storage files, I found something unexpected: a USB drive labeled HOA 2021. I had no memory of saving it. But when I plugged it in, I realized it contained copies of older HOA emails, invoices, and PDFs, back when Mr. Donnelly was still manager. At first it seemed useless. Until I noticed one file, Employee Records Backup XLSX. I opened it. It was a spreadsheet listing staff names, ID numbers, and employment dates, and that's when my breath caught. Susan Blake's name wasn't there. Not even once. She hadn't worked there in 2021 or 2022. She didn't exist in any official record before 6 months ago. So who was she? That night I sat in the dark, the glow of the laptop illuminating my face. I started searching deeper: public records, LinkedIn profiles, even county business filings. There was no Susan Blake associated with our HOA anywhere. No employment record, no LinkedIn page before last year, nothing. The only trace I could find was a LinkedIn post showing her new role in our community, liked by exactly one person: Michael Donnelly, my old HOA manager. My jaw tightened. Could Donnelly have helped her? He'd retired suddenly last year, supposedly for health reasons. but what if that wasn't true? What if they were working together? The following morning, I decided to visit Donnelly. He lived a few blocks away in one of the older houses on Maple Court. When I knocked, it took a while before the door opened. He looked thinner, older, but when he saw me, his eyes widened with recognition. "Ethan Harris," he said quietly, "haven't seen you in a while." "Mr. Donnelly, I need to ask you something important." He hesitated, then motioned me inside. The house smelled faintly of old wood and dust. I told him everything: the forged signature, the fake fees, Susan Blake, the threats. When I mentioned her name, he went completely still. After a long pause, he said, "I warned them this might happen." "What do you mean?" I asked. He sighed deeply. "Susan isn't who she says she is. The board brought her in after I left, but I'd seen her before years ago. She worked under a different name for a management company that was caught falsifying maintenance invoices. I told the board not to hire her. They didn't listen." My heart started pounding. "So you think she's behind this?" "I know she is," Donnelly said. "And if she's forging signatures, then someone on the board is helping her cover it up." "Do you have proof?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Maybe, but if she finds out I talked to you." His voice trailed off. He looked out the window nervously. Then he handed me a folder from his desk. "Take this. It's the old audit logs. They show every transaction before I retired. Compare them with the new ones you have. You'll see the pattern." I opened the folder just enough to glimpse pages of receipts, signatures, and spreadsheets. When I looked up again, Donnelly's face was pale. "Ethan, be careful, she doesn't play fair." I drove home with the folder on the passenger seat, my mind spinning. Every instinct told me I was getting close, too close. That night, I printed copies of everything, labeling and organizing the evidence. I planned to meet the attorney again on Monday. But around 11 p.m., as I was sorting the papers, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email. From Susan Blake. Subject: unauthorized investigation. My heart skipped. The message read, "We're aware you've been contacting residents and accessing internal HOA data without permission. Cease immediately or face legal consequences. S. Blake." I stared at the screen, feeling the walls close in. How did she know what I was doing? Had she been watching me? I looked out the window toward the quiet street. A dark SUV was parked under the lamppost. It had been there for hours. That's when I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. And someone was willing to destroy me to keep their secret hidden. The SUV didn't move for hours. I sat in my living room, lights off, watching through the thin curtains. Its headlights were off, engine silent, just a dark shape against the curb. It wasn't unusual for cars to park along my street, but something about this one felt deliberate. I couldn't see inside, but once or twice I thought I caught the faint glint of a phone screen. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that it could be a neighbor's guest, maybe a delivery driver waiting on an address. But deep down, I knew better. Susan's email had come only minutes earlier. Cease immediately or face legal consequences. It wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. And now someone was outside my house. I picked up my phone and called Brian, the lawyer. It rang 4 times before his groggy voice answered. "Ethan, it's almost midnight, everything okay?" "No," I said, "I think someone watching my house." He sighed. "Did you call the police?" "Not yet. I don't even know what to tell them, that my HOA's sending people after me." "Look," he said quietly, "don't confront anyone, lock your doors, close the curtains. Tomorrow I'll file a protection request. In the meantime, document everything: time, date, screenshots, anything suspicious." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "All right." When I hung up, I took a few photos through the blinds. The SUV was still there. Then, finally, around 2 a.m., its headlights flicked on. It slowly pulled away and disappeared down the street. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I found a new letter slipped under my door. It wasn't in an envelope, just a folded sheet of paper that said, "Stop digging, some signatures are best left buried." No sender, no name. My throat went dry. I checked my security cameras, the ones facing my porch, around 3:12 a.m. A figure appeared in the footage. Black hoodie, baseball cap, walking fast. The person slipped the letter under my door and left before the motion sensor light even turned on. I sent the footage to Brian right away. He told me to keep it secure, said he'd add it to the case file, but I could hear the concern in his voice. Someone was watching me, and now they were warning me to stop. By that afternoon, I decided to take a risk. I drove back to the HOA office. I wasn't going to yell or threaten, I just wanted answers. When I walked in, the same receptionist looked up, startled. "Oh, Mr. Harris, Ms. Blake isn't here today." "Where is she?" She didn't say. She's been working remotely this week." "Working remotely, perfect." I glanced around. The office was quiet, just two other employees typing behind glass cubicles. I noticed a closed door at the end of the hall with a small nameplate, "Records Room." I took a slow breath and said, "Could I get a copy of my homeowner file for my attorney?" The receptionist hesitated. "Normally, that has to go through Ms. Blake." "I understand," I said calmly, "but my attorney needs it urgently, just the copy of my file, nothing else." She bit her lip, clearly unsure, then she turned to the computer and typed something. After a moment, she printed a few papers and stapled them. "This is what's on the system, Mr. Harris. Please don't tell Susan I won't, I promised." I thanked her and left before anyone could stop me. In my car, I spread out the papers. Most of it looked normal: a payment history, maintenance notices, a few standard letters, but one page caught my attention. Owner adjustment form, approved by board president. At the bottom, under the approval section, were two signatures. One was mine, forged again. The other was signed Michael Donnelly. But I knew for a fact he'd retired months before that document's date. I pulled over to the side of the road, gripping the paper. The forgery wasn't just random, it was coordinated. They were using Donnelly's old signature too. Which meant someone had access to archived files, maybe even Donnelly's credentials. I called him immediately. He answered after a few rings. "Mr. Donnelly, it's Ethan, I found something." His voice was tense. "What did you find?" "Documents signed with your name after you left. Adjustments, approvals, all linked to Susan's activity." He didn't speak for several seconds. Then, in a low voice, he said, "You need to stop talking on the phone about this." "What?" "Don't call me again, not from your house, not from your phone. Come by tonight, but make sure no one follows you." Then he hung up. That evening, I drove to Donnelly's house again, keeping an eye on my mirrors. The streets were quiet. When I parked near his driveway, the curtains in his window shifted slightly. He must have been watching for me. He opened the door the moment I approached. "Get in." The lights were dim inside. He locked the door behind me. "Do you have the papers?" I handed them over. He read quickly, nodding grimly. "They're still using my credentials," he said. "When I left, I warned the board to revoke my access. Guess they didn't bother, or maybe they didn't want to." "Why?" I asked. "Why would they let this happen?" "Money," he said flatly. "When Susan came in, she promised the board higher returns, bigger reserve funds, improved community projects, but none of that money went where it was supposed to. I think she and at least one board member are siphoning it off. And to make the books balance, they're inventing debt. Yours, Clark's, everyone's." I felt a surge of anger. "So they're stealing from the entire community." He nodded, "and forging signatures to make it look legitimate." "Do you have any proof?" He hesitated. "I had some files on my old HOA laptop, but they took it the day after I resigned, said it was company property." I rubbed my temples. "So we're back to nothing." "Not exactly," he said. "There's one more place they might have stored the originals. Susan insisted on moving all archives to an off-site unit for security reasons. I think that's where the real documents are." "Do you know where?" He opened a drawer and pulled out an old envelope. Inside was a printed address, Oak Ridge Storage, Unit 47B. He looked at me sharply. "If you go there, be careful. If they catch you, they'll call it trespassing." "I'll handle it," I said quietly. Before I left, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "Ethan, they're dangerous. Promise me you'll tell someone where you're going." I nodded. "I will." I didn't. The storage facility was on the edge of town, rows of metal doors under flickering yellow lights. By the time I got there, it was close to 10 p.m. The office was closed, but the outer gate had a keypad. The code was printed faintly on the envelope, 2947. I entered it, the gate creaked open. Unit 47B was near the back. I parked quietly and stepped out. My flashlight beam danced across the numbered doors until it stopped on the right one. The lock looked new, recently changed, but next to it the thin metal latch was slightly bent like someone had forced it before. I knelt and looked closer. The padlock had scratches, maybe from a screwdriver. Someone else had been here. I took a deep breath and tried the handle. It didn't move. Then, suddenly, a sound. A car door closing. I froze. Footsteps crunched on gravel behind me. I turned off the flashlight and ducked behind a nearby unit. A dark SUV rolled slowly down the lane, headlights sweeping across the doors. It was the same SUV from my street. The vehicle stopped near Unit 47B. The driver stepped out, tall, wearing a hood. They walked straight to the door and unlocked it with a key. The light inside flickered on for a few seconds. Then they rolled a metal cabinet out and shut the door again. I stayed perfectly still, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The person loaded the cabinet into the SUV and drove off. I waited until the sound faded completely before moving. When I finally approached the unit, I noticed something on the ground, a single folder that must have fallen from the cabinet. The wind flipped its cover open. Inside were copies of bank transfers, tens of thousands of dollars, all labeled HOA Reserve Fund allocations. Every transfer went to the same account name, Blake Property Services LLC. I felt dizzy. That name wasn't even the HOA, it was Susan's own company. She created a shell business. I took photos of everything with my phone and left the folder where it was. I didn't want anyone to know I'd been there. When I drove home, the fear turned into rage. They were stealing from hundreds of homeowners and framing us to cover their tracks. I sent the photos to Brian with a message, "Proof of fraud, we need to go to the police." He replied 10 minutes later. "Don't move, I'll call first thing in the morning, keep everything safe." That night, as I sat in the dark kitchen, I heard a faint knock at my door, 3 slow taps. I froze. No one should have known I was home. I walked quietly to the peephole. There was no one there, just the empty porch. Then I saw it, another piece of paper stuck to the doorframe. I pulled it off and unfolded it. "You shouldn't have gone to 47B. No signature, just those words." I looked out across the street again. The SUV was back. The next morning, I met Brian at his office. His face was pale when he saw the photos. "This is enough to start a case," he said. "But it's dangerous, Ethan. If these people are moving funds, they might destroy evidence once they know you've got this." "Then we move fast," I said. "Call the police, the county fraud unit, anyone." He nodded. "I'll handle it, but we'll need your testimony." I agreed, signing a few preliminary papers. Just as I was leaving his office, my phone buzzed again. Another email, this time from the HOA directly. "Notice of foreclosure proceedings, property at 218 Maple Ridge." My house. They'd officially filed for foreclosure. I stared at the screen, barely breathing. It wasn't a threat anymore, it was real. I looked up at Brian. "They're trying to take my home." He clenched his jaw, "Then we stopped them." When I got back home, I found 2 police cruisers parked outside. For a moment I thought Brian had acted fast, that maybe help had finally arrived. But when I stepped out of my car, one of the officers approached me. "Ethan Harris." "Yes." "You're under investigation for falsifying HOA documents." I blinked. "What?" The officer held up a paper. "We received a report from the HOA this morning. They claim you accessed private records, forged internal approvals, and threatened staff." "That's insane," I shouted. "They're the ones forging signatures." He didn't flinch. "Sir, we just need you to come with us for questioning." My mind was spinning. This couldn't be real. They were flipping the story, turning me into the criminal. I took a step back, heart pounding. I didn't do anything wrong. But the other officer had already moved behind me. I felt the cold click of handcuffs against my wrists. As they led me to the car, I looked back at my house, my home, and saw a woman standing near the corner of the street. Red blazer, sunglasses, watching. Susan Blake. She smiled. That image burned into my mind as they drove me away. The woman who'd forged my name, stolen from hundreds, and now somehow had me in handcuffs instead. I didn't know how far her power reached. But I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't giving up. Because if she could forge my signature, then somewhere out there was proof she'd done it before. And I was going to find it. I couldn't sleep that night. My hands trembled as I stared at the copy of the document I'd received from the county office. There it was, my name, my supposed signature, on a paper authorizing the HOA to impose a special assessment of $70,000 for community infrastructure repairs. But the problem was, I never signed it. I compared the signature again, slowly tracing the curves with my finger. The handwriting was close, almost identical, but the slant was slightly off and the pressure was too heavy. Whoever had done this knew my signature well, but not perfectly. That's when I remembered something. A few months earlier, the HOA president Mark had asked me to sign a routine acknowledgement form for a landscaping project. He'd been oddly friendly that day, almost too friendly. I refused to sign without reading it first, and he'd looked irritated. Now I realized maybe that's when he'd scanned my signature. I grabbed every file, every HOA notice I'd received over the last year, and spread them across my dining table. I noticed a strange pattern. Several community approval forms included my printed name and signature, but I had never been invited to vote or approve any of those projects. Someone had been using my name to approve expensive HOA projects, and now they wanted me to pay for them. The next morning, I went straight to a local attorney, Sarah Kim, a sharp woman who'd handled HOA fraud cases before. After listening carefully, she leaned back and said, "Your HOA's behavior is highly suspicious. If that signature's forged, this could be a major case of document fraud and embezzlement." She helped me file a formal fraud complaint with the county recorder's office and also notified the state's HOA regulatory board. But she also warned me, "They'll try to intimidate you, they'll say you're lying, be ready for it." And she was right. Within days, I started receiving letters from the HOA's lawyer accusing me of defamation and obstruction of community interests. They even threatened to put a lien on my property if I didn't resolve the issue. But I didn't back down. A week later, Sarah called me with urgent news. "The county office verified the document you brought. It was filed under a different notary ID than usual, one that doesn't exist." That meant someone had not only forged my signature, but also used a fake notary seal to make it look legal. We finally had proof. Sarah advised me to stay calm while she contacted the district attorney's office. "If we handle this right," she said, "this could expose a much bigger fraud ring inside your HOA." Meanwhile, I decided to dig deeper myself. Using the HOA's own website, I downloaded their financial disclosure reports. There, buried inside a dense spreadsheet, I found several payments labeled consulting fees and maintenance supplies. But when I checked the listed vendors, most of them didn't even exist. Mark, the HOA president, was transferring HOA funds to fake companies he controlled. It was time to confront him. At the next HOA board meeting, the room was full. Neighbors chatted quietly, unaware of the storm about to hit. Mark sat at the head of the table, smiling confidently. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and placed a folder on the table. "Before we continue," I said, "I want to talk about this." I handed out copies of the fraudulent document, along with a forensic report from Sarah's office showing the forgery details. The room fell silent. Mark's smile vanished. "This is nonsense," he said, his voice rising. "You're just trying to avoid paying your dues." But I didn't back down. "Then explain why the notary ID on this form doesn't exist, or why these vendor payments go to businesses registered under your wife's name." Gasps filled the room. Several neighbors turned to look at Mark in shock. Within minutes, the meeting turned chaotic. Board members started whispering, others demanded explanations. Mark stood up abruptly, grabbed his briefcase, and stormed out. That night, I knew the tide had turned. The next morning, police arrived at the HOA office with a search warrant. By evening, it was all over the local news. HOA president accused of forgery and fraud, over $300,000 misused. Investigators discovered that Mark had been forging multiple homeowners' signatures to push through bogus repair projects. The money from those fees had been funneled into his personal accounts and shell companies. The $70,000 bill I received was just one piece of a much larger scam. Months passed as the investigation unfolded. Mark was arrested and charged with forgery, fraud, and embezzlement. Several of his associates on the HOA board resigned under pressure. But my fight wasn't over yet. I still had a lien on my property because of the unpaid fees. So, with Sarah's help, we filed a civil lawsuit to have it removed and to recover damages. During the court hearing, I stood before the judge as Sarah presented every piece of evidence. The forged signature analysis, the fake notary records, the financial trail linking Mark's wife's company to HOA accounts. The judge leaned forward, frowning as he examined the documents. "This," he said slowly, "is one of the clearest cases of organized fraud I've seen involving a homeowners association." When he finally banged the gavel, his words echoed through the courtroom. "Case ruled in favor of the homeowner, all fraudulent fees are nullified, lien removed, damages awarded." I closed my eyes. Months of stress, sleepless nights, and fear finally melted away. In the weeks that followed, the community began to rebuild. A new HOA board was elected, made up of honest neighbors who promised full transparency. The county even launched a special oversight program to monitor all future HOA financial transactions. Sarah became something of a hero in our neighborhood, and I made sure everyone knew how crucial her help was. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, she called. "You know," she said, "if you hadn't trusted your instincts, this entire scheme might have gone on for years." I smiled. Yeah, all it took was noticing one wrong curve in a forged signature. Later, a letter arrived from the court. Inside was a check, restitution from the recovered HOA funds, but more meaningful than the money was the handwritten note from one of my neighbors. "Thank you for standing up when the rest of us were scared to. You saved this community." I folded the note carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. It reminded me that sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy, but it's worth it. Months later, I saw Mark's mugshot appear on the news again. He'd accepted a plea deal. He would serve several years in prison and repay hundreds of thousands in stolen funds. As for me, life finally returned to normal. The constant anxiety, the threats, the sleepless nights, they were behind me. My home, my peace, my dignity, all restored. I planted a small tree in my front yard the next morning, not as a decoration but as a reminder. A reminder that truth, like roots, always finds its way through the dirt, no matter how deep someone tries to bury it.